Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. Some say the not so great tennis podcast. I'm Steve Smith, along with at the table, Ivan Ozerets. And we got an oldie goldie on the line, Dave Anderson, who's helping us all the time. But a big treat, an honor. We have Doug Cash, an expert. People say top of the charts. I think of Anderson and myself as ball hopper pros, and I think of Doug as and this is a compliment, briefcase pro. Really knows the business backwards and forwards. I believe Tennis Corporation of America, he can tell us if I'm accurate, 30-some years, 55 clubs, 27 employees. Two types of people, those people from upstate New York and those that wish they were. He's an upstate New Yorker, hicks and slicks, that he's a hick, not a slick. But let's fire away. It's great to have Dave on the line because we both can ask questions. And the side of tennis that Dave and I are on, we certainly would say loud and clearly that we need to always know more about the business side of tennis. But Doug, welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast, and thank you for being a guest.
You're more than welcome, Steve. I'm looking forward to it.
Tell us your beginnings, your roots. How did you get connected to tennis? I mean, you're 75 years young, so you have lots of time in the game. I consider myself to be a product of the tennis boom because when the tiebreaker came in the 70s, but I know your connection to indoor tennis, but you were in it 5 years. You're 75, so you're 5 years older than me. So you're a historian. Tell us about your start.
Well, tennis didn't exist any place that I knew of when I was a kid, and I didn't even think about it. You played baseball. That was Little League baseball was about the only thing you played. And then my real passion at first was basketball. I went to Ithaca on a full ride for basketball. And my high school basketball coach, and we were pretty decent. We actually played against Ruel Cinder, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, when he played for Power Memorial in New York City. So I'm about the same age as he is. And I came up to a little higher than his belly button when he ran by me on the court, but that's the way it was. So my basketball coach in high school was also the track coach. And so everybody on the team had to be in the track team. Well, the track team was the same time as the tennis team in high school. My mom and dad both were tennis players. My mom won the city championship at age 16. My dad was a accomplished senior player. He was also just about made the Olympics in skating. So I get a little bit of athletic background from those guys. But I used to go on Sunday mornings to watch my dad go to the University of Rochester, and they had 12 tennis courts there, and a whole bunch of people came on every Sunday morning. I never played. I did play with my mother once, and only once because she beat me, and I said I'm not going to play my mother again after that happened. So, but I hadn't played before, so I got the interest in tennis. And so when my basketball coach told me I didn't have to go off the track my senior year, I decided to go off the tennis team. Never played before, and I played on the team. I have no idea. It's 70 years or 60 years ago how I did, but I caught the bug. And therefore, in the next summers and in college, I played hours every day. Loved the sport. Still played as much basketball as I could. Actually, before I came a little bit better in tennis than I was in basketball on a sort of national basis. But it all started because I used to go with my dad to watch him play tennis on Sunday mornings. And that's how it started. Never took a lesson. Still haven't taken a lesson in my life. I think that a little story of you have someplace in here, how did I get into the world of teaching it? Well, I went to Ithaca and I wanted to coach basketball, and I got a couple of college offers to be a grad assistant and stuff like that. But so I took a job there. I coached 7 varsity sports at one school, 2 a day, basically, during the year. And in the summer, I would teach tennis at a yacht club up in Lake George, New York. And in 1973, Midtown Rochester, where Steve, you were the director of tennis at one time in your life, was built. And so I taught a little bit of tennis in the summertime in the college up in Rochester, so they sort of knew my name. They called me and said, would you like to come and be a full-time pro year-round? Well, it was the first time in my life that I ever considered being a tennis pro year-round, because back in the this is the late 60s, early 70s, to be a full-time tennis pro, you had to be nomadic. You had to be up north in the summertime and down south or California or Texas in the wintertime, and there were no indoor clubs. Midtown Chicago was one of the first big clubs in 1969. Midtown Rochester was about 73. So January 1st, 74, I started with Midtown. Worked there for 40 years. Started as a staff pro and ended up running a company 40 years later. And so tennis has been with me all that time. And that's sort of how it happened.
Do you still, all these years, have basketball in your blood? I mean, you follow it, you're a fan?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you're in Indiana and you got Larry Bird and Rick Mount, people like that, you'll know that even though Rick Mount name, you got to have basketball in your blood to live in Indiana. We live about 45 minutes from IU, and Bobby Knight, like him or hate him, was one of my favorite coaches. And you can learn a lot from people who have. I considered him a genius with a fatal flaw. And there's lots of those people in the world. And if you can get by the fatal flaw part of it and take the genius part of it, figure out how they did it, how they coach people. Because in my world of, I taught high school, I taught math, I taught drug education, I taught basketball, I taught tennis, I taught every sport you can possibly imagine. In my whole life, it was always the same. You're still teaching, you're still coaching. The subject matter may be different. So for the last 30 years of my career that I was working with Midtown, I wasn't coaching tennis anymore. I was coaching people, how to manage other people. And it was no different. You're still their coach. You still have to do the same things as you were teaching a lesson, but you're teaching a person how to manage other people. And so I always thought, I've never changed my profession. I just changed the subject.
Oh, that's well put. I've never heard that genius and fatal flaw. I mean, obviously, Dave and I spent a lot of time studying Bobby Knight. I'm on the side. I love the late Bobby Knight. For listeners, I was under Doug when he was the chief operating officer, correct?
Yep.
Let's spend a little more time on your youth. As far as tennis, the good old days. What do you think of tennis? If we could bring back just a few things from the 70s, how would that help tennis today?
Well, I'll give you a couple interesting stats. In college, in my first 20 years of playing tennis, I never played anybody with a trained backhand. Okay? They didn't have any. Rarely did I play anybody who didn't have a continental grip. Okay?
Yeah.
So all those things I had mentors who I studied, and I'll give you that little background with why it's important. Back when I was 1973, 74, when I was considering doing this full time or trying to do it full time, I said, how do I learn more about teaching? There were no computers, didn't exist. Movies didn't exist now to teach tennis. There were no videos. There were a few books, not many. Cat Murphy, people like that. So I found this guy named Brait. And I said, I like this guy. And his book, Tennis for a Future, which I'm sure you've read 100 times, in 1974 was published. And I said, I got to learn from this guy. So I took 3 or 4 people in the country. And I said, I'm going to learn what they know about tennis. And Braden was the first one. So I am a graduate of the USTA. And there's only, I'm going to say 30 in the world. And the reason there's only 30 in the world, it only lasted 1 year because at that point in time, it was the United States Tennis Academy by Vic Braden. I still have the diploma on my wall. And the United States Tennis Association was the USLTA, US Lawn Tennis, so he could be the USTA. They then became the USTA the next year, so he couldn't do that anymore. They had a little more power than he did. And so only 1 year did we graduate. We went out there for a week. He gave us a test at the end of the week, and we either graduated or didn't graduate from the USTA for Vic Braden. And then I did that also with Dennis Vandermeer. Went to one of his tennis University for a week and his stuff. Then I went down and visited Mr. Bollettieri for a week. And then I had this, about twice a year for about 5 or 10 years, I would pick who I considered a top pro in an area. So I like what Steve Smith does. So I called Steve Smith and said, Steve, can I come up and watch you on a Saturday all day and then buy you dinner at night and ask you a few questions? And back then, people said yes. So I would drive to wherever, Columbus, Ohio, wherever I was going at the time, watch a pro teach all day long, take all my notes, get all the questions I didn't understand what he was doing or why he was doing what they were doing. Then I have dinner with him and discuss all my questions. That's how I tried to learn how to teach tennis.
No, it's a great story.
So that, because there's just no other way to learn back then. There just wasn't. And then when I ended up with Midtown, we had some very good tennis pros that do a lot more than I did when I started with the company. And so people like Spike Gonzalez and people like that, who were already in the profession for a while, they did a good job of educating us on how to teach. And one of the things that was fascinating about Midtown is in the 60s in the United States, 90% of the lessons given were one-on-one privates. And if you gave 4 people, 6, 8 people on a court to a pro that spent his whole life teaching one-on-one, they had no idea how to teach it. And they'd put 4 people or 5 people on a line, teach everyone a 5-minute private lesson, then rotate around. And they didn't know. Midtown had this theory that we were in the group lesson business. And I came from teaching school. I'd have 50 kids on a basketball court of 8,000 square feet. And now you want to give me 6 kids on 7,200 square feet? I thought I was in heaven. Where a lot of pros were in hell. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I said, this is all you're going to give me? Where's the rest of the people? And so it was very easy for me to teach multiple people on a court and do what I had to do. And I had this acronym that I've used for 50 years called FEERS, FEERS. And each one stands for what I think every lesson should have in it, whether it's a group or private or whatever. The first is fun. The second is education. The third is exercise. The R stands for relationship. And the S, it has to be safe. And each of those things are important in the right amount. You have to have them all, and it has to be appropriate for the people you're teaching. For instance, if you had a bunch of 22-year-old guys, the exercise level is probably different than a bunch of 85-year-old guys. It's got to be appropriate. The amount of education is appropriate to who's there. How much fun it is. Yeah, you can play tennis, baseball the whole time when you were a kid, and it was fun, but that wasn't a good lesson because that's all you did. You have to form a relationship between the students, between you and the students, and the club and the students. And it obviously has to be safe. So the word FEERS came with me for a long time on how I taught other people to teach. They had to have all those components.
I know we'll get around to Alan Schwartz being a mentor for you, but how about in your youth? I mean, siblings or?
I was the oldest of 3, two younger sisters. My mom and dad were, they grew up they were born in the teens, 17 and 19, of 1919, 1917. And, so they grew up in the Depression. They grew up in the world of kids don't speak unless they're asked to speak. So my dad was very quiet, but when he spoke, you listened to him. And that was the way it was back in those days. My mother really did most of the discipline and stuff of us. So my dad taught me a lot of things without doing much. He did it by example. What his work ethic, what he stood for, the way he treated people. He owned a couple of companies in Rochester, New York. My real first mentor was a guy named Mauro Panaggio. Mauro Panaggio was my high school basketball coach. And, I went to a very large high school, East High School in Rochester, and we had about 4,000 kids, 8th through 12th grade. So we had 900 kids in a class. Was probably 40% African American at the time. The basketball team was 90% African American. The coach and I were two of the only white guys on it. And you could tell when my parents were in the stand, type thing. But Coach Panaggio was the first person that I ever wanted to impress in my life because I wanted to start in basketball. And we were good. My 2 years that I played the varsity, we were 42-1, and we won the state championship. And we had a guy, Norm Bounds, who could take quarters off the top of the backboard. How he could jump. And so he was my first real mentor. So I wrote a paper on how did I learn my skills from management and tennis from other people. And he was my number one person I learned from. And how you treat everybody equally, how you demand and set expectations and make sure people do them, how standard is a standard and a rule is a rule. If you don't enforce it, get rid of the rule. And I can remember coming late to practice one day because my mother had to finish watching a soap opera. And so, of course, it wasn't my fault that I was late. It was my mom's fault, but that didn't make any difference. And I remember, the things he would say, cash in on the foul line, you got one shot. If you make it, we're going home. If you miss it, we're all doing 20 laps, and then you're going to do it again. And so I learned by pressure. He put more pressure on me than there ever was in the game. I only had 1 year as a high school coach. I had a JV coach before that. And then my junior year, he was our coach, and we won the championship that year, lost in the finals of the state. And then he got recruited by a suburb team. And so the next year we played them in the finals. Boy, did I want to beat my old coach who left our school. Now it's another school. And it's probably the only record I have. I don't know if it's still there. But I got 5 offensive fouls on the other team, which set a school record. That's my only record I have in basketball. But we won that game. It was nationally televised. I wish I had the tape of that game. And then, so that was my first mentor because I learned a whole lot about him and what he put us through, how he made us do things and the rules. And if you didn't do it, you didn't play. And I think Bobby and I agreed with him that the biggest motivator in basketball is the bench. If you want to play, you do what I tell you you're going to do. Otherwise, you're on the bench. Well, that was motivating to me. So that was my first mentor.
And what about college and Ithaca, college basketball?
College basketball is a fascinating story. I played very well as a freshman, sophomore, and as a junior. I rode the bench most of the time on the varsity team. And then in the fall of my senior year, I broke my shoulder bone playing football. Probably a stupid thing to do, but, college. And so I got cut from the team. And I was devastated. I'd never been cut from anything in my life. However, it turned into one of the biggest opportunities I ever had. Back then, you had a head coach and you didn't have anything else. And as a freshman could not play in the varsity, back there, you had to play in the freshman team. And so, and by the way, when I played in the freshman team, I played against people like Calvin Murphy. And you may know who those people. I played for Niagara then.
Yeah.
Because they were freshmen. I never would have played them because they were better than me, but they had to play freshmen too. So Bob Lanier, another big guy that I played against as a freshman. And so I went to the freshman coach, who was my freshman coach, and said, "Coach, can I help you for the rest of the year as an assistant coach?" They said, "Absolutely." So I got my first training under him of being an actual coach of a team at a college level. And the interesting story is one game towards the middle of the season, the varsity coach, his name was Hugh Hurst, became ill. And so the JV coach had to go with the varsity team to Colgate or someplace like that to play. The freshman team had a game against Cornell, at Cornell. They said, Cash, you're the coach for the night. And so petrified. Here I am, senior in college, coaching on a freshman team as the head coach against a team that we never beat before our lives, Cornell. The athletic director sat behind me in the stands because they had to have an adult there because I wasn't an adult yet. I was, 20 years old. And the game part of our game got put on national TV because Cornell varsity game was on TV, and I just went to double overtime. So our game went too long, so they were broadcasting part of our game. I got mentioned as the youngest coach ever in college basketball on the air. And for the first time ever, we beat Cornell. And that started my basketball coaching career.
Well, for our listeners, Cornell and Ithaca are in the same town, so that must have been big rivalry.
Correct. They are, and we never beat them in much of everything.
I remember Calvin Murphy. I was a hockey guy, but so he certainly was in the news and recognized. But he's the one who was so good football halftime with the baton, twirling the baton. Remember that?
I do remember that. And by the way, there was another guy called Randy Smith. I don't know if you remember that name.
No.
He's the only 3-time All-American in 3 sports in one season in college. It was soccer, basketball, and track. He's an All-American, all 3 of them. And it doesn't happen very often.
Wow.
And it never happens.
Here's a question for you from Rochester. Definitely older than me. My parents were very good friends with Whit and Betty Reed. Mr. Reed, he taught engineering at RIT, I believe. Either that or the University of Rochester. But do you remember Mike Reed? He was a Rochester kid who was very good in basketball.
I don't remember that name.
No, so he's maybe a little bit younger than you. But he went on, he played in college. So, for me, when you go on a college campus and intramural basketball is pretty impressive. It's very impressive. If someone, I don't know how it stands today, but back years ago, if someone could make the starting 5 on a high school basketball team, because it was a driveway sport, people understood their target, people practiced all the time. Back in your day, obviously people were playing all day outside. Playing hockey is one of the most dangerous things. I remember refereeing in intramural hockey, and why it was so dangerous is his kids playing it couldn't skate. They couldn't stop. But basketball, what a great sport to become an athlete. It's such a great sport for a tennis player, huh?
Well, again, think back there. There were no 3-point lines. My favorite player in college basketball at the time was Pistol Pete, Ozerets from LSU. He was the same age as I am. And he's the highest scorer ever. I think Caitlin Clark broke his record this last year. However, they also averaged 42 points a game or something like that without a 3-point line. And they did the way you can do the filming of where he shot in the court. They figured out he would average 66 points a game if there was a 3-point line, but there wasn't. So, we had different ways. We didn't lift weights. The coaches at that time didn't think lifting weight was something good. You couldn't shoot afterwards. So amazing how that science has changed over that period of time. But I can tell you this, for hundreds of evenings, I would play basketball with a group of guys from the team for hours and hours and hours. And then sit around and have pizza and soda. Rochester, we call it soda back then. But that's what you did. Eventually I did that. Same thing in tennis. But it was just a bit different. I was a bit older. But basketball taught me a whole lot of stuff in the teamwork. And, it's a remarkable sport. It really is. For
the listeners, Pistol Pete, there was Pistol Pete Sampras, but Maravich, he slept with the basketball. If you want to be good, he just had the basketball in his hands all day, every day. Amazing.
If you ever watched the movie The Pistol,
yeah,
you will smile watching that movie. I watch it. I own it, and I got to watch a couple times a year. I just have to. So.
Oh, that's great. So talk to us about becoming a physical educator, that education, and then initially you became a teacher.
Yeah, I wanted to be a basketball coach.
Right.
And that was the route. And I taught, did my student teaching at Fairfield High School in Rochester. It's a suburb of Rochester, which I know you know that a little bit, Steve.
Yeah.
And Jeff Welch was the guy, the basketball coach who I studied under, and I did my student teaching. And after I graduated, I had two offers to be physical ed teacher, one in Hudson, New York, but I had to be the swim coach, and one in Hague, New York, which is on Lake George. Very small school, but I could be the basketball coach. It was a fairly easy answer. My wife and I were driving on the New York State Thruway to Albany. You took a left to go to Hague or a right to go to Hudson. Well, we took a left. I'd never been there before. And I went up, and it was a very small school. It was 300 kids, K through 12. And so that's why I coached seven varsity sports, because I taught both men's and women's and JVs, the whole bit. So I was only a coach, so I'd coach at least two sports every day. And then taught, as I said, tennis at the yacht club in the summer. But I really wanted to be a basketball coach. I wanted to be the guy, the Syracuse coach. I think it was name off the top of my head. Terrible. He went to Lions, New York, and I played against him in high school, and he became the Syracuse head basketball coach. Whatever his name was, can't think of it off the top of my head.
No,
but
I remember when I'm obviously younger than you, but Johnny Alberg, his father was a VP at Syracuse, and first time I ever saw an athlete, it was watching Dave Bing, and I can't think of his name either, but the gentleman you're thinking about played way back when Dave Bing played.
Yep. Dave Bing was, one of those guys you knew about, and he was a classy player. So the physical education was a whole. Again, in high school, I never would have thought I'd become a tennis teacher because it didn't exist. And so I wanted to be a basketball coach.
Jim Boeheim. Jim Boeheim.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. It's a Lions High School, and I played against him in high school. So, yep, that's exactly right.
No, like for myself, I wanted to get into coaching, and back in the day, it was, you become a PE teacher, but that was so appealing to me about tennis is that you could make your living in a sport. So I started to study tennis. I know we'll have Dave Anderson start asking questions because he's managing 25 pros, and certainly he would have all sorts of questions to ask you. But so then you crossed the bridge from being a PE teacher to being a tennis pro on the court, and you shared with how you became a tennis teacher, how you studied it. How did you get into the management? How did you eventually become the CEO of Tennis Corporation of America?
I was a staff pro for 2 or 3 years, and the one nice thing about working for a company, and at the time, only had two clubs, one in Rochester and one in Chicago. And I didn't know this really when I joined them, but they bought a club in Boston. And so back then, I taught, I was teaching 50, 55 hours a week. They liked what I did. Obviously, I never managed anybody. They said, "Do you want to be the director of tennis in Boston?" Of course, I said yes, good, bad, or different. And so it started me on a different career, now getting things done through others rather than doing it myself. Obviously, there's lots to that. So, I went in there. We had 9 indoor courts where I started and had to hire a whole team. And I'd never hired anybody before. I actually remember I had to hire my first person 2 or 3 years after I got in there. That was a new thing for me. I'd never done that before. I didn't want to do that. But you're forced. Now I started reading management books rather than tennis books. That doesn't mean I stopped reading tennis books. I just now had a new job. And so that changed my life a lot when you go into management. And then you also get things like, what's your budget? What'd you do last month? But this is a profit and loss statement. You were handed, what does it mean? So in our company, we had some good ways for other people to learn that from people already there. So it was mostly Spike Gonzalez at the time who taught me, what do you do with those things? How do you manage people? And so, again, that changed everything. In 1979, we bought a club in Evansville, Indiana. And the owner there wanted me to come there to be the director very badly. And so within the same company, you can transfer and still work in the same company, which is what I did. So I then moved my family to Evansville, Indiana. I was there about 30 years. And so I was first the director of tennis there. Then I became, a couple years later, I became the general manager. The general manager before me was a lady named Woody Sublett. So she was not only about umpiring and refereeing, she was the chief umpire for U.S. Open for many years. And so that's where she left the job at the club to go do that. So I became the GM. And then when we bought club in Kansas City, they said, would you like to manage that and Evansville? So I said, sure, this is now managing from afar. That's even a different skill. And then clubs kept getting added. There was a guy in my role before me who, eventually he left. And so I took over and grew the company. And now I had 45 clubs I was responsible for, and almost 3,000 employees. And so different things become important. Our number one revenue source was dues. So I had to become an expert on how to sell a club membership and how to get leads, because 70% of our revenue came from dues. Only 20% came from tenants. So I had other people like AJ Butch Staples, Michael Mahoney, on and on and on, the people who could do the tennis part. So I let them do the tennis part. I did the membership part, which was more important at the time. So that's sort of how my whole life changed. I also had the theory that the more money you touch, the more money you make. And so as a tennis pro, you touch $150,000 if you're lucky. So you can only make X, whatever that is. As a director of tennis, you can touch a couple $1 million in a program. So you can probably make a little more money doing that. As a general manager of a club, you can $5 to $10 million. But I was managing $250 million. And you can make a little more money doing that. It's a different pressure. The goal was a goal that I'd never heard before. Mr. Schwartz, and I'll have a story about him in a minute, wanted a 20% return on his money. Well, I didn't know what that meant. But now that was my goal. Well, how do you do that? And I said, I don't want to be training how to give you a return on your investment. And so again, I had to learn a whole different world. And probably Alan was my biggest mentor in life other than my dad. And I spent years with somebody that I admired a lot. He was Mr. National Indoor Tennis, godfather of indoor tennis. So he'd done it all. And I can tell you a few stories on how we learned I learned from him. Back then and there, we'd travel a lot together, do whatever we were doing. And back in the 80s, 90s, you spent the night at a hotel, you slept in the same room, and I was in double beds. Before we went to sleep every night, we'd have conversations on, Alan, what did I do well today? Alan, what didn't I do well today? Alan, what should I have done today? And what shouldn't I have done today? And we'd have these conversations every night. And I welcomed the conversation, especially when he told me something I should have done or didn't do or something, because that's the way I learned. I didn't really care about things I did well. Of course, I cared about it, but that's not how I learned. And so we had those conversations, and I made a point to make him coach me. And he liked doing it. But sometimes you have to make people coach you by asking questions. We started a gamble, the two of us. His office wasn't too far away from mine, and we each put a number of quarters in our top drawer and right-hand drawer. And we bet each other all the time who was closer to the right number, to the right fact. What was the retention rate at Forest Grove Athletic Club last year? What was the retention rate? Well, without looking it up, because you couldn't look it up, we would bet a quarter who was closer. And it was a fun thing to take quarters from him. But when I was right, but it made me study. It made me get ready for meetings, even more so, because I knew I was going to bet quarters with Alan. But it was his way of training me. And he didn't realize that at the time. It was just fun.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so I can go back and back with stories about Alan and what he did and how he managed people. And, I was with the guy 40 years, and I never saw him raise his voice. I never saw him lose his temper, except for one. He did it with his son. Very different when you do it with your own family. He didn't do it once with his son, because that's a little different. But, I never saw him raise his voice. I never saw him not live up to his word. He didn't have to put anything in writing. He did, but didn't have to, because his word was his word. So when he shook his hand, that was it. And so you learn a lot of things from who that person is in your life.
I was fortunate to be around him a few times. I know he went to Yale. He played tennis. He was the chairman of the USTA, correct? Isn't he in the International Tennis Hall of Fame?
Yes, he was. And he actually was also a Harvard Business School grad, Yale undergrad, Harvard Business School grad. And in fact, he gave Yale indoor courts are named after him. So I'll tell you the story of how Midtown occurred. Not everybody knows this. His father, his name was Keevy Schwartz. And his father was in the real estate business. And so Alan, being in the real estate business with him, they wanted to do something they could do together, and they both loved tennis. So they bought a piece of property on Fullerton Avenue in Chicago. And so we're going to put a tennis club up there. And we believe that down the road, the real estate will be worth a lot more. And if we can just break even and have a good time with the tennis, we'll be fine. Well, Alan had to go to 56 banks to be able to get a loan, because nobody ever heard of indoor tennis. So they weren't about to invest money in giving a loan to a guy to build indoor tennis with no background, no nothing, and there was no indoor court anyplace. Finally got a guy he went to school with and said, Alan, I trust you. I know nothing about this tennis stuff, so I'll give you the money. And so they built a 14 indoor tennis court, which at the time was the largest in the world, on the corner of Elson and Damon and Fullerton in Chicago. Eventually added 4 more courts, two more. 12 courts started, they ended up with 16. Then maybe 10 years ago, they invested $85 million and made a mega club that is extremely successful to this day. So the goal was to build places and own the real estate. Hopefully the real estate was going to appreciate over time. And then the tennis business became very profitable, or fairly profitable. They decided they were in the real estate business anymore. They were in the club business. So it's all changed. To give you an example of what Keevy Schwartz, his dad, would do to make the money he made, was way back in Chicago. Every block in Chicago had 5 segments of land on it. And he'd buy the middle one, which nobody wanted. And he had this vision that someday people are going to want bigger spaces because they're going to have to do parking. Well, he owned the middle lot in all these places in Chicago, blocks, shall we say. And all of a sudden, Walgreens and places like that needed parking, so that when they buy it, they had to buy 3 of those lots in a row. And he had the middle one. They could name his own price, and he did, and they all bought it. And so that's the kind of guy he was to look to the future of, what he did. And that's how he started making his money. So Midtown, the story there, it wasn't supposed to be a tennis club. It was supposed to be a real estate deal. And it turned into a a club company that today, I think they only have about 10 or 11 clubs today, but they're all very successful.
David, why don't you start? We'll start with some questions. That's an amazing start to double your journey in tennis. Thank you.
Fascinating stuff, Doug. It was fun to sit back. I could listen to you all night, and I can tell you have an incredibly quick learning curve, it sounds like, in regard to life, from just kind of an ambition and no fear of failure. I love it. And but it like the TCA and the situation you're in, we had invited, formerly Club Corp /CCA, our staff now. What advice would you give to, we have 25 roughly on staff now, pros full time, and what advice would you give to some of the pros? Because I have a wide range of people, and there's people that are specifically doing different things throughout the day and not really brushing shoulders with each other's clientele. Some juniors, some adults, some a little bit more of a mix of each. But somebody that wants to go the route of director of tennis. Let's imagine a 22-year-old coming through the door. They want to get in tennis, and their passion, is maybe not just to be the on-court, but to be somebody who's followed a pathway like you, and maybe they have big dreams. But even if it's just to be a director of tennis, what advice would you give to them? Because as you know, it's difficult. The training process is difficult because they're often glued to the court. What could you offer to somebody like that?
Well, we learn certain things through osmosis, which means that if they watch you managing them, that's one way to learn, because hopefully they learn the good things. A couple things you don't do as well, they say, I'm not going to do it that way. That's the way we all do it. But there's a couple things that make you stand out and get the next position, or either within your company or with a new company. And so you got to do your job better than anybody else does it. Well, there's lots of ways to do that. Could be teaching the most hours, could be having the most success from a revenue standpoint or from a profit standpoint, or as a number of people want to join the club because of you. You have to shine amongst the other stars. You got to be the brightest star. You also have to do other things very well. For instance, I rate every person who's ever worked for me. I have 4 ways I evaluate their performance. And it's been that way for years, and I'll try to explain it to you, because this also would be, if I was a young pro, I better be outstanding in these 4 areas. The first is some financial measurement. That could be number of hours taught, something. If you're a club manager or a general manager or a director of tennis, it's how your department did, how your club did from a revenue profit standpoint. There's all kinds of ways to measure it, but there's a measurement from finance. Number 2 is you live and breathe the standards of the club. Every club has standards, some better than others. Some expectations are better set than others. Usually the bigger the company, the more standards they become in general. So you got to make sure you live up to the standards every time, especially when people aren't looking, because that's when people look. Third, am I develop myself or other people that work for me to make them better? What kind of education? If you're a staff though and you don't have anybody working for you, I have a rule of thumb that you spend at least 2% of what you make every year in further education for yourself. You might be with a company invited by do this. We did some of them, sure. If they give you personal money for education, and how do you use that? What do you take? How do you better yourself? You probably also know that I'm adjunct professor at the University of Florida, where I teach the director of racket sports master's course for the industry. It's the only master's course in the industry. Kim Basketball and myself teach that course. We had about 80 graduates so far in the last 3 years, and we have about 120 people that were in the course during that period of time, and some haven't finished it yet. but it's a course on how to become a director of racket sport. So things like that. The last, can I trust you? And trust is not a worried about whether you steal from me or not. That's a problem too if you did, but it's whether I can trust you do your job when nobody's looking. And those things influence people around you and give you a chance. I trust you, you're going to do your job. I don't have to worry about you. You're going to follow the standards, every single one of them, and you believe in it, you do it. You're going to financially produce what you're supposed to produce, and you're going to develop yourself or your team to the best of their ability and make them better. Those 4 criteria drove me, and I demanded that from everybody who worked for me, that they had to do the same. So if you're a young 22-year-old, you still can apply all those things to yourself. And one of the things I used to do when I was a staff pro is I would say, is there anything I can learn? Can I go to any meetings? Can I do this? Can I do that? Can I help you in any way to the manager of the club? Because can I learn how to work the front desk? If I really want to work the front desk, hell no. I didn't want to work the front desk, but I wanted to learn how to work the front desk. Does that make any sense? I didn't really want to do it. But I knew if I was going to manage people, I had to learn things like that. And so you have to learn what your job's going to be, so you don't have to panic and do it when you don't know how to do it. But the first thing, you've got to be a great teacher. And so I had a career path for people, and the first was you got to be a great teacher. The second is then I'm going to give you things outside of that teaching. It could be an administrator to run a special event. How do you do that? Run a tournament. And you keep going from there and keep learning more parts of the job. Because all those things will have to happen. And I had a little plan that I got my senior pros that wanted more down the road. They'd get involved in training of the new pros. They'd get involved in hiring of the new pros. So I went through how to interview, how to train people. So they had to do part of it themselves. So my goal was, again, that third square, how do you develop your people? How do you educate your people? That's what I was doing. And I knew those skills are the skills they needed to do when they got their own job as a director. And one of the other things every person should do, you should know as a director that what 22-year-old, what their goals are. And if you can help them achieve their goals, you've now created a very good future employee for you, invited or for somebody else. And so I did a lot of what are the goals of my team? What kind of money do they want to make? What do they want to learn? What kind of positions do they want to have next? Where do they want to live? What do they want to do from a playing standpoint if that's there? What do they want to do in the industry? Can I get them to be able to talk at a PTR convention? Whatever. My goal is I have to know those things so I can help them get them. I don't know them, probably not going to do it. So goal setting for each of those areas in their lives was important to me.
Could you touch a little upon willing and able, how you break that down 4 different ways?
I will. There are, in the world of management, there are 4 categories of people. And I drew out a little chart with squares on it. At the top is willing, on the bottom is not willing, to the left is able, and to the right is not able. Willing means by definition, I want to do whatever you're telling me I should be doing. Able means I have the skills to do it. Unwilling means I don't want to do it. And unable means I don't have the skills to do it. Well, everybody fits into one of those squares with every job you give them. Okay? Now, the best is the person who's willing and able. The worst is the person who's unwilling and unable. Okay? So you manage all those people differently. You have to. The person who's willing and able, you say, go do the job. Let me know the results. If they know how to do it and they want to do it. If they're able and not willing, you then have to direct them to do it. I direct them. You're going to go do this job. You already know how to do it. You got to do it, and I'm telling you to do it. It's a directive. If they're unable but willing, you have to train them. And if they're unable and unwilling, then generally you get rid of them at some point. But everybody fits in one of those categories for everything you do.
Doug, thanks. Go ahead. Okay. I remember you saying years ago, a standard would be a pro taking a day and a half off a week and working 55 hours. So if you could touch upon time, because I know you used to make a point that people could be at a club for hours and hours and not really be producing, not really be working. They're there, but they're putting in time and not putting in effort. Accountability. Could you touch upon that?
Sure. The world's changed. What's normal when I was doing it in the 70s and the 80s, question what's normal today is totally different. If you've been reading some of the stuff from Simon Gale and people like that, I've spent a lot of time with trying to get 5-day work week. To give you an example of expectations that are beyond my beliefs, but the USDA starting in 2025 now gives all employees 13 weeks off.
Wow.
And that's a lot of paid time off, 13 weeks. And I know Simon was talking to me the other day that he said, my head pro and I both to take 13 weeks off, and therefore for 6 months a year, I don't even talk to my head pro. Because he's gone and I'm gone, and we can't be gone at the same time. So there was never an expectation to take 13 weeks off back in the 60s and 70s. That didn't exist. We were lucky to get a week off paid. We were lucky to get paid vacation, but that's a whole other story. But, this new generation who works 7 days a week, forget it. We did. But it was all by choice. I wanted to make money. Okay? Not right or wrong. If I could have done it in 5 days or 4 days, sure, I could do that. I had never figured out how to do that. It wasn't good enough to do that. But, so obviously with life balance and things like that, how much vacation, 50% of the clubs in the United States and their mom and pop don't have any benefits. They don't get any paid vacation. They don't get sick pay. They don't get health insurance. Big seven that Dave and I were talking earlier, all that stuff exists, but it's good, bad, or different. You got obviously country clubs that exist more than some of the private mom and pop clubs because it's not their money. It's run by dues. So on court, off court, is it hard to teach 4 13-hour days? Yeah. It was not real hard when I was 30. I wouldn't want to have to do it today. So on court, off court, it's part of the life. We are a eat what you kill industry for many years. There's you start talking compensation. I know later we'll talk compensation. There's lots of ways to do it. It's changing what's expected. I can tell you one thing in the industry. This will surprise a few of you. We've done a very poor job with the industry raising prices. And when I say that, in 1974, I charged $22 an hour at Lefton. I didn't set that price. Midtown did. Okay. If I CPI that to today, it's about $163. I'm not suggesting we should be charging $163 at an indoor club today. I'm saying that we were scared to raise the prices because everybody thinks when you raise prices, you lose students. And that is possible. Depends how much you raise them. At the same time, I got paid $8 and $10 an hour to teach in 1974. I got paid $8 an hour to teach a private and $10 an hour to teach a group. Which one do you think I want to teach more of?
For sure, the one where you got paid more.
Compensation dictates behavior. Okay? And we will talk about private versus groups at a point there, I'm sure, because I know it's on sort of the list. So, but as an industry, we have not done a good job paying people. When I was teaching school, I was making $6,000 to $7,000 a year. Again, you got to remember this was in 1971. And by the way, I had a house, a car, Again, I didn't even think it was low. Today, I can't even imagine. And the average school teacher made $6,000 to $10,000. When I got my first job as a teaching pro, I made 20. I thought I was a king. Right? I was more than twice of what I was making teaching school. So it's an easy decision financially to become a tennis pro. Today, that's not true. Not true. The average first-year pro probably makes 60. The average first-year school teacher is 50 to 60. First-year pro then should be making 120 for the very first year. I'm not talking about seasoned pros and people. I'm talking about year one. Not many year one pros making $120,000. Shouldn't they be? In the way I grew up, yeah. Would I like it to be like that? Yeah. Do I know how to do that? Somebody's got to pay for that. If we haven't raised the price of lessons over that period of time, the right amount, you can't do it. Can we price ourselves out of the market? Sure you can. But we have trained our members not to expect a lot of price increases in tennis. Now, since COVID, I think that it's been different. My average price increase since COVID in those 4 years is between 25 and 30% from the number in 2020 to today's number. And there's not a peep out of it. That we had to pay pros more and want to pay pros more? Absolutely. But so compensation dictates behavior. I know, Steve, you asked me a question. I know that's there is the, I make a statement when I speak a lot. I dislike private lessons. And let me give you my rationale behind it. And it's really over the last couple of years I dislike private lessons. Number one, it has nothing to do with the value of them from the teaching standpoint. You know, their private life, their private teaching. I've given a lot of private lessons in my life. However, two things have occurred in the last couple of years that have changed my philosophy. The first is tennis is booming and there aren't any courts. So therefore, from a logical broadcast perspective, putting 4 to 6 people on a tennis court versus one, it's my clientele to use the club. Number two, in general, we make more money coming in revenue-wise on a group lesson than a private lesson. Third, I can pay the pro more to teach the group lesson than the private lesson. So I've got a couple of rules of thumb that I've done with most of my clients in the last 4 years. Number one, no non-members can take private lessons except if it's a time you can't sell to a member, period. So no private lessons for a non-member ever in prime time, ever. Doesn't happen. I think, Dave, you were telling me Invited went to members only.
Yeah.
Most of those other companies are the same. Number two, no private lessons in prime time. Give them the times that aren't prime time. But I'll give you an example of more than I can expect, exceeds my expectations. I worked with 2 clubs that have the following rule, which doesn't come from me. I'd like to take credit for it, but I can't. If you want to play at that club between 9 and noon, Monday through Friday, there must be a pro on the court with you. You cannot just play tennis. They're sold out. I never had the guts to do that. It's way above my comfort level. And programming, so I'll make the statement in 1970, 80% what happened on a tennis court was people playing. 20% was programming. You might have had 1 or 2 pros at a club back then, and it gave mostly private lessons. Today, what happens on a tennis court is 80% is programming, 20% is play. Therefore, I need more pros. The second thing of why I feel the way I do about privates and things like this is I don't have as much pros as I need. It's getting harder to find them. People are retiring. People have left the business. There's all kinds of reasons, but it's much more difficult to find good pros. Therefore, I've had to change strategies on how many people you teach. From a logical standpoint, it wasn't necessarily easy. I don't like 1 because that's a pro for 1 hour, 1 person. And the more, the better. So here's the kind of things I've been doing. Number 1, my new favorite ratio is 8 to 1 to 2. 8 players, 1 pro on 2 courts. My favorite ratio now. It used to be 5 or 6 to 1. Now it's 8 to 1 to 2. Okay. Second, I'm doing much more of a, pickleball opened my eyes to open play. And if you know what open play is when you show up to play and you're put on the court and one person, whether it's a pro or not, can do a whole 10 court. And by just arranging open play of how they do it. So we came up with we call it matinee tennis. We're now calling it play groups. And what that means is they have a group of 5 courts, 6 courts. Doesn't make a difference. It's a number. And so it's a drop-in class where you can come and you can play for 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever you want it to be, whatever you want to charge for it. And what happens is once you get 4 people on a court, after you exceed that, so once I get my 21st person on a 20 court, on a 5 court, 4 on a court, the 21 becomes more than, I got 1 court becomes a drill and practice court for rotation. And you rotate around all that way. And the pro then obviously takes over that 1 court. And no matter how many people are above your 20, they now have 1 court for them still all moving, or they can rest, they can do whatever they want. And so they're called play groups. So now a pro can handle 30 people. They're not paying quite as much as they were for a normal group lesson. But we've had to figure out how to get away with fewer pros because they're harder to find. Dave, do you find it's a little harder to find great pros today?
Yeah, it's been really just a huge trend in the last decade almost. Kind of a gradual whittling away at candidates. I think you hit on it. The entry into it isn't maybe seemingly as possible, and I think that they don't know a pathway. Yeah, and so, but as of late, in the last 6 months, and maybe it's because of some of the perceived success of the club, what have you, but we've been getting a lot of good resumes through lately. But it was dry for a long time.
Yeah, so but overall in the country, it's slim.
It is. Yeah.
Let me say this, guys, for a second. Doug, I'd like to have you do a commercial for the University of Florida, the grad program. Tell us about that. One of our students is a student of yours. He's from Greece. Well, he was born in the U.S., but raised in Greece. And I know you had an accounting class one-on-one with him the other day on the phone. But he's been a guest on our podcast. He's 4 years older than Tsitsipas, but Tsitsipas and this young man, Konstantin, they both were taught out of Vic Braden's book, Growing Up in Greece. But why don't you just take a minute and tell us do a short commercial, let listeners know about the University of Florida, a little bit more about that.
I think your friend there lives in Columbus, Ohio, doesn't he?
Yeah, great guy.
He's at the Players Club.
Yeah.
So I know who my students are. University of Florida, and I'm going to say 5, 6 years ago, the USTA got together with a group of mostly US PTA pros, led by Steve Starrett, which we talked about with Dave earlier. He used to work for Club Corp. And people like Chuck Gill, Harry Gilbert, 5 or 6 more, wrote a curriculum for the director of racket sports and spent a lot of time on it. And they hired basically the University of Florida to deliver the course. So it's a real course. There's 2 ways to do it. You can actually be in a master's program where you take a bunch of other courses but you have a specialization in tennis directorship, or you can just take the certificate course, which is just that part of it, but not the Masters of Education part of it. And it's about $2,500 for a year for the certificate course, and whatever they charge for a year of master course, I'm sure that's 10 to 20 grand, a different number. They don't have anything involved in that really. And so Kim Bastable, former All-American at the University of Florida, is the head of the course, who was hired to run the course. And it's got about 10 modules. I deal in module 8, which is anything to do with financial part of the world, compensation, budgets, managing people, hiring and firing, compensation of how you pay people, what's the best way to do those things. And so I spent some hours with them one-on-one. And they have to produce some documents. They have to write a budget, zero-based budget for me. They have to do a compensation package because I always figure the first thing you have to do when you take a director's job is hire people and train people. You got to do that. Everybody does that. And so you got to know how to do that. And there's all kinds of modules on creating cultures, on, the history of tennis, management, standards. It goes on and on and on. And it's all online. And it's tremendous amount of people have gone through it. A lot of names, like Woody, Simon Gale, Butch Staples, AJ Pant, all the people took the course. And I tried to flunk them all on the financial module, but couldn't do it. I tried. So it's a very good course. I wish it was around. I would have taken it. But it's the only place you can get this stuff. It has nothing to do with teaching. It has nothing to do with what happens on a court from a teaching standpoint. Because you can get that all kinds of places. There's nobody that's teaching you how to be a director of tennis from a skill standpoint of management and from all the things you have to know. So it's a good thing for the industry. It's sort of, you have to have 5 years in the industry before you can take it. You have to be a certain level of both the PTA or PTA to take it, elite professional type level. So you have to have some background. You have to have references from some people to say you can be a leader or a manager in the future if you're not already. So your PTM programs, your professional tennis management program, sort of like what you had at Tyler for all those years, you can't go from that into this course directly. You have to be in the industry 4 or 5 years before you can do that.
No, thanks for telling us about that. David, go ahead, ask a question if you would.
Yeah, could you elaborate a little bit on, to me, culture is huge. I think it is to everybody that's involved in the people business. And, what are some key characteristics that you found as far as, I Midtown, obviously, in Chicago. And what are some of the key things that you think contribute from a staff standpoint and from, the creation of a culture? What are some of those attributes? And, if you have any that you really tried to instill not only in your clubs you were involved with, but throughout the company that you ran.
Sure. As you said, culture is your dream, and you can screw it up because you want the best culture. But finding what your culture is a start. Most people have trouble defining what their culture wants to be. So I start this way. The very first management principle that I teach to every single person is that you have the law of agreement. I call it a law. I mean, it goes like this. You live up to your agreements with others. Period. Whether it's somebody who works for you, somebody who works with you, someone who works above you, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your students, whether it's other members, your first law is everybody lives up to their agreement. When you tell somebody you're going to do something, you do it. The second part of that agreement is if you can't, you must go to them ahead of time and tell them that you can't make that deadline and renegotiate so that you don't wait till after you've missed the deadline. And so sometimes you're going to be told, no, you have to have it to me tomorrow at 9 o'clock, like we said, because I have to go to the bank at 10 o'clock for a meeting and I need those numbers, whatever it is. So if you start with everybody lives up to agreements with people, because guarantee you, in every rotten culture in the world, that doesn't happen. People don't live up to their agreements. And so that starts there. There's many, many more after that create. Second one is you create standards. You set the expectations of what you want. You make sure everybody understands them, agrees to them, And then you have to hold them accountable for doing it. If you're supposed to be on time for a lesson, you're supposed to be on time for a lesson. If you're supposed to return a phone call in 24 hours, you return a phone call within 24 hours. You create a base of standards of what you want to have happen in your culture. And then you make sure that they're done to hold people accountable. And I have a rule of thumb. If you don't hold people accountable for their standards, you don't have any. Standard is whatever they're doing. And so if I don't want to uphold somebody with a standard, then I should get rid of the standard. It shouldn't happen. But once a person knows you're not going to make them do what they're supposed to do, they're people. They know that. They know that. Those things ruin a culture. The third is trust. Trust is probably the number one word used when it's a bad culture. I don't know the word bad. I've heard all kinds of terms. Toxic cultures. I've heard all kinds of things. It's usually because people don't trust each other. Part of the trust starts with living up to your agreement. Part of the trust means holding people accountable for things, including yourself. If I tell somebody I'm going to give them something or they're going to get a meeting with them, doesn't mean I can't change the meeting. Doesn't mean, I'll meet you there someday on that. You got to live up and they have to trust you to do what you say you're going to do. So trust, accountability, agreement, all become huge trust things. Once you lose those things, very difficult.
Yeah, you said, I always called the law of agreements. I put it to bed. You have people that when you just, even if it's kind of inaudible in passing, but that you can put it to bed, it's going to get done. And Billy Purr used to always preach, do what you say you're going to do. Even if that means you had to learn to say no. And like you said, renegotiate, so to speak. But the put it to bed thing seems to be a very difficult concept for many people.
David, what does that mean? Put it to bed.
Well, I think it's from my dad, to be honest with you. He used to, when you were asked to do something, he wanted to be able to put it to bed. That means not have to think about it again.
Okay.
And know that you were going to do it, and it was done. And that's kind of the house that I grew up in. And I know go ahead. One of our corporate things that we, mottos was inspect what you expect, which is definitely necessary. But boy, when you have those rare people that you can just put it to bed and put it to rest, and know that they're done, what a incredible employee and partner they end up making.
I use something at the top of my list for a manager: speed of the captain, speed of the crew.
Mm-hmm.
Which is to lead by example if you want to get under that surface. But that's a very important part to culture. Steve will understand this one. What gets measured gets done. Because if you don't measure it, you don't know if it's doing it. We talk about agreements and standards. Every reaction or no action are judgment of your own leadership. How you react to things, how you don't react to things, people are all looking at you. Improvement in everything you do is another part of my culture. I also make the statement that everybody's in management. You must manage yourself before you can manage others. And so therefore, if you're late to a lesson as a pro, what are you going to do when somebody does that to you? There is conflict occurs when reality is different than your expectations. And you must manage the expectations of your team, the owners, your members, because you have to have conflict. But I guarantee there's not a culture in the world that reality is never, ever different than the expectation. It will happen. The morale, another word in the world of culture, and I firmly believe the person at the top is 100% responsible for setting and controlling morale. So the morale is not favorable, and someone up top is creating that for some reason. You got to figure out what that means. I have what's called the uninterrupted time principle. Part of my culture. The most important thing you give somebody is your uninterrupted time. Therefore, if I'm in a meeting with you, I will not be interrupted unless the roof is caved in. You're going to get my uninterrupted time because you don't want to hear me talk to somebody else about their golf game or any other damn thing. I have this next saying is, remember, what is popular is not always right. What's right is not always popular. That got me through a lot of times in my life when I had to look in the mirror and say, should I do this? And I always had to go, what is right is not always popular. What's popular is not always right. Last part of a culture is the top reason somebody leaves a job is because of their boss and the company culture. So 75% of the people leave a company because of their boss. So when you fire somebody, you fail. And it should never be a surprise that somebody gets fired. So those are all good bits and pieces of my culture.
Oh, that's well put. Thank you for all these golden nuggets. One thing, could you elaborate? I've heard you say this before. Jack Welch. Who is Jack Welch? Why was he so good? And the comment, and I know you have just a book of these, not invented here. If you could just talk about that.
Sure. Jack Welch was the chairman of General Electric, probably known as one of the greatest managers ever. He had, we'll talk about not invented here, lots of companies, lots of people think they can do it better than somebody else. I've been teaching people how to run beginners courses like Tennis in No Time or Learn Tennis Now for 50 years. And I've done it for 50 years and seen the results in 50 years. And I'll go teach somebody else how we did it. And they'll always never do it the way we did it because they think they didn't invent it. Therefore, if it's not invented here, we don't do it that way. And I had to myself, and I had to get my people that work with me to understand stealing is part of life. I'm not talking about real stealing. I'm talking about if you find something that works well, why did it work well? Do the same thing. Don't do something different just because it's not invented here. Jack Welch also had a theory that is very strange, but at the time, General Electric was very, very profitable for their stockholders and for it was almost unbelievable that he did it. If you have 100 people, each year you get rid of the bottom 25 of them, you rank them all 1 to 100. You get rid of the bottom 25% of your workforce every year and bring new people in.
Wow.
Just think about that. Number one, what's it do for, you got some, I'll give you an example. I have a good friend who owns a bunch of clubs and he owns car dealerships. And every month, if he has 250 car salesperson, the bottom 10 people every month get fired. Now, I don't know if I like that, but I'll tell you, it's an interesting theory. And Jack Welch says, if those people aren't doing B work and above, I don't want them here. And I don't want speed players. Hard to argue with that theory to a certain extent. From a practical standpoint, that's really difficult to do. And I never did it. I never could figure out how to do it. I wanted to do it, but that's Jack Welch. That's why he was so significant in the world. And he's got lots of books out there that were written years ago that are still interesting to read.
Oh, thanks. I remember, Dave, you worked for Dick Tucker, and he used to say, didn't want any Bs on the team. He wanted all A's.
Well, that's even worse. You're going to go up to 75 people on the 100 unit fire.
He always, he didn't, he seldom hired a C. He said you can never make a C and A. Jack Welch was a little like Bobby Knight. He understood the power of benching.
Well, we talked about that earlier. You're absolutely right. So,
Doug, could you talk a little bit about formulas and how you pay people? Like, say somebody at a club is going to run a social event, they're selling membership, they're running a tournament, they're traveling with players. Obviously, one shoe doesn't fit all sizes, and one program is different than the next. But could you just kind of give us some ideas on compensation?
Sure. I'll start with my third that I talked about just a little earlier, just a statement, is compensation dictates behavior. And as it was when I wanted to teach group lessons rather than privates because I got 20% more pay. So that starts out with my first theory is what do you want done to pay the most for? What brings you the most revenue to pay the most for? So that's why I said earlier that if a private lesson is $100 and a group lesson brings 160, I want to pay the pro more for the 150-hour lesson versus the $100 lesson. And by the way, for years and years, and still at a lot of mom and pop clubs, people get paid more for the private lesson than they do for the group lesson. And to the dying day, I'll never totally understand it. What I'm told is, well, we gave him the group lesson, we don't have to pay him as much. And he solicited the private lesson, so there's some marketing in there. All that's true. I don't argue with that. But at the same time, I look at, $160 versus $100. The difference to me is as a manager or owner, I want, the larger amount more time. So I want to pay the pro more to do a great job and want to teach groups rather than private. So, how you pay that person, the pay scales in the world it's got to be win-win. So I'll start there with compensation. If it's not win for the employer or the pro, it's not win for the club, then it's not win. Sometimes winning doesn't seem logical. For instance, I deal with many country club pros, and there's country clubs that give 100% of the revenue to the pro. Is that right or wrong? Not either. Is it fair? Is it win-win? Okay? At the end of the day, somebody's got to answer that question. In a commercial club, you never give 100% of the revenue to the pro. It doesn't happen. Never happen. Okay? Should it happen? I don't think so. And here's why. The compensation starts with how do you get your money? A country club has probably got 80 to 90% of its revenue comes from dues. And when they've got high initiation fees and high dues, then they can have what's called loss leaders. The fitness center, your pool, your tennis department, your food and beverage. They all can lose money because you're doing so well in dues. Okay? At a commercial club, you're going to have three sources of revenue: membership, court fees, and programming. Okay? You need profit from all of those things. The dues are probably not as high as a country club in general, so therefore you must make more money from the programming part of it. So when you ask me how to pay a pro, it's got to be win-win. Everybody's got to think it's fair, whether it's a percentage, whether it's a per hour rate. All those things I could discuss for hours of what it is. There's not a right or wrong. It has to work. And by the way, however you pay somebody, it has to be managed. You still have to manage it because you've got on-court work, you've got off-court work, you've got lobby work, you've got exempt versus non-exempt work, whether they're exempt from overtime or not exempt from overtime. All those things, for instance, when you said off record earlier, Dave, about being an independent contractor, if you go into the world of the IRS and get to find an independent contractor, there's hardly a pro in the world that's really an independent contractor.
Mm-hmm.
An independent contractor is someone who sets their own fees, collects their own money, teaches all kinds of places, doesn't have to wear uniforms, doesn't have to come to staff meetings because they're not part of the team. That's not the definition of a pro. Right? So they're not really independent contractors. Why do they want to be? Why does the club want them to be? In certain cases, the pro wants to. They don't take taxes out of my pay. You got to file your own taxes, but that doesn't mean they do. I hate to say, I won't say this too loud, but when in my 20s, teaching outside in the summertime, somebody would hand me a $20 bill. I was never going to get the IRS that I made that $20. And I think there are a lot of pros that say the same thing back in those days and still do today. So how do you pay people for things? Really, you have to define the whole big picture. In general, more money you bring in, the more money you teach. So if you got 6 people in a group lesson, you should make more people than when you have 4 people in the group lesson if it brings in more money. Whether you do that percentage or you can do an hourly percentage, well, that's the way to do it. What I don't like about percentages is the pro gets a raise every time you raise the price of the lesson, whether you deserve it or not. I don't think that's the way it should be. I want to give pros raises, but I don't want to make it only because I raised the price on something. I also, when I don't raise the price on something, I still want to give the pro a raise if he's worth it, if he deserves it. So I'm not a percentage guy because of that reason. I do it by hourly plus some number for every person above a certain number in that lesson, you get paid more for. So when you run an event, I like to be in the profit business. So I will take a pro and generally split the profits with them without court fees, 50-50. And whatever they have to work to do it, obviously the profit, if they have to have other people, if they have food and beverage, whatever, they got balls, trophies, whatever it is, comes out and we split the profits with them. I have a sort of a formula of expectations. I take the revenue from the tennis department. I think about 15 to 20% of that revenue goes to salaries of people in the tennis department, and anywhere from 40 to 60% become commissions for what goes on. Each one's going to be a little different. Each club's going to learn how that numbers break out, but in general, that's about what you get. So you get a payroll percentage, because I know one of the things that in an interview, if you ask a potential director of tennis, what should the payroll percentage be in our club? There would be a lot of people that can't answer that question. And since that's your largest expense of every club in the world, payroll is the largest expense. You better be able to answer that question. And by the way, it will be different at different clubs. Rightfully so. I can't tell you what it should be in every club because there's no formula that produces that. I know of clubs that want, and it's okay, their percentage of payroll to revenue is 135% of revenue is payroll. I'll bet you Club Court might have a couple of those. Some of the country clubs have that. It's amazing. When I say that, how do you pay people? It's not an easy question, Steve, to answer. By the way, taking juniors to tournaments, that doesn't happen anymore as much as it used to. You're still in that business a little bit, but most often big companies say, liability, you ain't doing that. Parents drive them. I'll coach them at the plate. I used to take kids. We slept in the same hotel room back in the 70s, just the way it was. That type of stuff. Any specific things you want me to talk more about that in that area?
Well, one thing, you use the word trust so many times. When certainly the competency of the pro, what they're doing on the court is so visible. I mean, there's nowhere to hide. But when they're off the court, certainly the trust of, if they're going to run a social event, they're going to execute it from, they're going to put it together from beginning to end. Here at the resort that I'm based at right now, the pros, they've been allowed to, we'll just pay you, X amount of hours per day. And then in the end, how successful was the social event. And my recollection would be that you would have had a formula for that. So say, they bring 30 people and they pay $30 each, and, there's $900 generated, and, what percentage would they get of that?
I give them 50% after we take out balls, whatever expenses they have.
Right. Yeah.
It's pretty well.
But I think that you already touched upon this because you break down your ethics check, and I think that covers what sometimes it's a mystery when coaches just disappear. They're they only had 4 lessons for the day, and they think they're working around the clock, and what are they actually doing when they're off the court? And it makes it very difficult for the director. I know when I was at Midtown Rochester, um, I was part of renovating an office, and back in the day, everybody had their own locker, and they had a Rolodex, and their Rolodex had to be increasing, and they had to have a telephone notebook, and and you meet with the pro for 30 minutes each week, and say, okay, let me see the phone calls you've made, and I think that type of work is just not done anymore. Like Dennis Vandermeer used to make people call 5 new people a day.
Yep. I mean, I love all that stuff. Let's go back to you made a statement about ethics check. I said I was looking in that mirror, and when I look in the mirror, I got to make sure what's popular isn't always right, what's right is always popular. But also, when you make any decision, there was a ethics check on that decision. The first is it legal? Okay. When you hire somebody and you misclassify them, it's not legal. So why are you doing it? Number 2, as far as the company goes, is there a policy about whatever you're doing? And are you following? Number 3, if this was on the front page of a newspaper, would you be okay with it? Number 4, what would your mother say if she knew about it? And number 5, what would God say? That was sort of my ethics check. And so when people say, here's your compensation, but I don't want you to tell anybody because I'm paying you more than some of my pros are already here, and they wouldn't like that, can't do it. Because if that was on the front page of the paper, how would your current employees feel? It's legal.
No,
Mother may be okay.
These pearls of wisdom are great. Go ahead, David. You have a question?
Yeah, I mean, my mind is thinking so much. I've always believed in win-win, not just in the employer relationships or managing people, but really in dealing with clientele, with with students, with parents, with players, and I think that you hit on a key thing that I just wanted to just go back to, and that is taking the time to find out about people and finding out what it is they want to do. Because, with me, going back to when I had hair and I was making a fortune working for Steve and Tyler, it was very clear in my mind I wanted to coach tennis till the day I die. He ignited a passion in me for just really discovering all I could about it. So I learned a lot about the club industry, not even a fraction of what you've gained in your lifetime, but I think it's so important that anybody that is in a role, and we're again, whether it's a player we take into our program, whoever it is, it could be an adult player that's sitting on a ball machine, finding out about the people. And it goes back to your fears, the relationship aspect. I think that it's very easy not to do when you're brushing shoulders with people every day. It's actually very easy not to do, to make the time, take the time. And I love your uninterrupted time. Such a valuable concept. Really more of a comment than that, and anything you want to add, but just great stuff.
One question, Doug, do you ever get senior moments, 75 years young?
Not that I know of, but again, it'd probably be better to ask my wife that question.
No, I'm just teasing, but
I know I have selective hearing.
Yeah,
I have that.
I have total recall. I recall totally what I want to. But tell us about the ATs.
Well, there's something called the ATs of success, that for somebody to be successful, they have to have They have to know these things. Number one, you have to have a target. Number two, you have to have the right tools to reach your target. Number three, you have to be tries, which means you have enough effort that you're going to put in to reach your target. You have to have train other people to help you reach that target. You have to have the time available to reach that target. You have to have the touch, which is what I call care. You have to have the care enough to reach your target. You have to have the trust of your boss to reach your target. You then have to track it, which is managed by stats. And you want to add testing to that, I think. And so that was the 8 keys of success. The person has to have that. There are 3 parts of every person when they become a manager. They have to have 3 things: the responsibility, the authority, and the knowledge. If you have the responsibility for something, do you have the knowledge to do it? And do you have the authority to do it? If you don't have those 3 things, then you can't manage something. If you don't have the authority, if you don't have the knowledge, you can't do it. So this all plays into that. The 8 T's of success to make sure you get out of it, and so people have all those things so they can become successful.
Oh, that's great. One more. OIC.
Yep.
Give us a breakdown. OIC.
My favorite things. I teach a course called Management by Stats, or KPIs, which is key performance indicators. And almost everybody's got some. Not some use it more than others. I use them a lot. So I had an organization information center. What that was, it was a chart on my wall, and every wall of every manager in Midtown had them. And it showed how you were doing. So the organization information center became, oh, I see what's going on. And that's where the OIC came from. Oh, I see what's going on. And we'd have graphs of the things you're responsible over time. And in that graph, it's without any knowledge of what you're measuring, you can tell if it's going up, it's flat, or it's going down. Got to be doing one of those things. How much is going up, how much is going down. Those are different parts of it, but it's going to do one of those 3 things. And I guarantee you, everybody's happy when it's going up. People are concerned when it's flat. And people are unhappy when they're going down. And what do you do about if your graph is doing those 3 things? So I taught everybody, when your graph's going up, this is what you do. When your graph's flat, this is what you do. When your graph's going down, this is what you do. So that everybody can have constant improvement, which is a graph going up. And so that was every person. So a tennis director's OIC would look like this. How much revenue are you doing in your department by the month? How much profit? How many how many students do you have? How many hours are being taught? You can go on of how detailed you want to get that, but I guarantee you, and I did this with my children and with kids. Glenn Williams, who became the director, was general manager at Midtown after you were there. Even for his kids on his refrigerator, he would graph their spelling scores. Not tell them a word. He would just put a graph on there, and it was black when it went up and red when it went down. And what does every kid want? They wanted to see it go up. They had no idea what he was doing. And it's not going up. What do you do? Well, they're smart enough. I better study more, Dad. Or whatever it was. And so people react to a vision of something much better than a number of something. Like 2 numbers next to each other versus a graph going up, down, or sideways. And it works every time. People see the progress. And what I've always said, if your graph goes up constantly, unless you do something crazy, you'll have a job forever.
You know, I was around Glenn Williams enough to, I've always shared this, is that when he would meet with a staff member, a tennis teaching professional, I mean, he was very organized, and it was just a basic ring binder, the three ring paper, and he just knew, okay, what did we talk about in the last meeting, and what did you get done? What do you need to get done? Doug, you need to be really commended for everything you've done with the USPTA, now the RSPA and the PTR. I think I could say this for David. Tell me otherwise. I mean, I've been a member of one for 46 years, the other in 43. I was a tester, but I haven't really been very proactive in a long, long time. I don't think you have either, David. I know back in the early days, but I think one of the problems with, not an excuse, but when, you really get involved with junior tennis, I mean, it's especially today, it's amazing. Like almost every time you give a lesson, the parents are there. And it's just, I know Wayne Bryan used to say, you should charge the parents. I mean, if tennis teachers would charge like a lawyer, the lesson's over, but it's, now you're having a lesson over the lesson. And, but what do you think was going on with the certifications, good, bad, and indifferent? What needs to happen to make tennis better through those organizations?
Well, I joined the PTA in 1974, so that's 50 years this year, or last year.
51.
And the PTR I joined in 75. My numbers, like I'm 300 in the PTR, which means I was 30 member number 300, and I'm about 1,000 in the PTA. So there weren't that many in front of me. And I've kept obviously their membership. I speak at all their conventions for years and years. I'm now on the PTR board, so I know a whole lot what's going on those organizations. And also, I interviewed last week. I had a podcast interviewed Craig Morris, and it was sort of interesting because I asked him some tough questions in regards to what's going to happen in the future, what happens. For instance, the accreditation the USTA is given to PTR, PTA. PTA found out of theirs a year or two ago and haven't got it renewed. We're going to lose ours at the end of March 31st. Our accreditation goes away, and they're not going to renew it. They are taking over a lot of the education. They're spending $15 million on education. They are doing apprentice programs. They're doing a lot of things. They don't believe the PTA, PTR has done a good enough job with education. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it themselves. And they're spending a lot of money. And whether they start certifying pros like every other federation in the world, whether it's Canada, France, Spain, doesn't make any difference. It's a national federation who certifies pros. Whether they're going to go that route, no one has said exactly. I bet a few dollars that they are going to do that someday. And their benefits will probably be better than what the PTR and PTA can give. So what's going to happen to our both organizations, I don't really know right now. We're just doing what we're doing and trying to do as well as we can. Both organizations are growing right now. There's people that like that we're into pickleball and all the other things. There's people that hate it. They don't like it. They think it's just be tennis only. But what I tell Craig Morris is this. The education of pros is not going to make the game grow. It'll help. But it's not going to make it grow. Most pros don't even think they need it. 80% of the pros don't think they need further education. They think they know it all. By the way, the most important thing of a pro, and this may be controversial in your guys' mind, because you're so much in education, the best pros I ever had started as DPPs. A DPP is a dazzling pro personality. I can teach anybody how to hit a forehand. I can teach a pro how to teach a forehand. But I can't teach personality. I can try, but if a guy's got a great personality and people love him, the rest becomes a little easier to do. Most people don't know what a good pro is or not.
I think it's time for me to interrupt. And
okay,
Doug, when I met Dave Anderson, he had no personality.
Yeah. And now I have no hair because I met you.
Oh, you made that choice.
But sorry to interrupt. Go back to Craig Morris. So one thing with Craig Morris, I think I could interview Craig Morris because Craig Tiley was with us for 7 years, and David was there from day one with Craig. That would be interesting because of Tiley's background. I know now, I would say, and he says that he's primarily in the entertainment business, but like what he did at Illinois, before he went to Illinois and took the team from obscurity to national title, Dave would know Chad Clark and Julie Scott. It was done on courts in East Texas before he even went to Champaign. Such a sharp guy, such a hard worker, but Yeah, and what's going on in Tennis Australia and what's going on with the USTA. But go more on with what's going on, Craig Morris and that meeting.
So I really think that number one, they have three goals. 35 million people playing tennis in 35, which is 10% of the population, and that's what they figure. It's 350 million people. When that comes out, they need 350,000 tennis courts, one tennis court for every 100 players, and they need at least 100,000 instructors. And that's USTA stated as their goal for 2035. And I think number one goals for 2035, I may not be alive at that point in time. So that's a long ways off. And so I think it's too far out. I don't like 10-year, 12-year goals. It's too far out because you can just say it'll happen next year. And so I said, your number one goal is to produce more pros, not education. The education is the easy part once you get to be a pro. How do we get more people that want to be pros? We need people that want to be pros. And, with the way it is today, it's just not happening. There are qualified pros out there. There's lots of qualified pros. Are all of them great pros? I mean, here's the way I've always looked at it. If I got three pros teaching on three different courts, one certified by the PTA, one by the PTR, and one not certified, I'll be damned if I can tell you who's who. No idea. Now, if the fourth court, there's a Steve Smith, GreatBase kind, I'll be able to recognize him. And so I'm going to put a little of my, Steve is in my opinion, Welby Van Horn, Vic Brayton disciple, rightfully so. And I was a Vic Brayton disciple. Not as much as Steve was, because Steve did a lot more with him than I did. I went to his last class he ever gave, by the way, out in California. I took a group of TCA executives out there, and then they closed the place after we left. It had nothing to do with us. We knew that was going to happen. But Vic Brayton, by far, I can tell you that the students all look like they know what they're doing. Steve's students all know that. I'm personally involved with a couple of Memphis that he was teaching quite a bit of, know their mom pretty well, and they're all fundamentally sound. Morally, they know why they do what they do. That doesn't happen every day. If they know why they're doing what they do, and they do it, and fundamentally they're very, very strong. And I've made this statement even to my own kids. I have 6 of them. If you want to learn how to teach tennis, you go to Steve Smith and learn how he teaches tennis, because he's the best in business. And I believe that you have more, I'm going to say, maybe not disciples, students of your own that you taught how to teach tennis than anybody in the United States who's living right now. That's what I think about your ability to train.
No, I appreciate the kind words. One thing, backing up a little bit for our first-time listeners, Craig Tiley is a South African, but he's a CEO now of Tennis Australia. Craig Morris is Australian. He worked for Craig. And one thing with the USTA is I think Craig Morris should go and sit down with Matt Clore, who's a co-worker. Matt is one of our guys, and he spent the last 17 years doing all these things with us. And what we're trying to do is carry the torch. And I may have 5% original thought with what we do with tennis teaching, but it's great to hear what you had to say about Vic in the beginning, and even here just now, or Dennis Vandermeer. That's so important that facts are facts. Fact-based instruction for long-term development. But it's really interesting with what's going on with the governing bodies of tennis. Just think of all the people who've done so many things with the PTR over the years. I grew up in ice hockey, and no one's ever going to say, Bobby Orr couldn't play in today's game. But, people should not really be allowed to utter the thought, like, Welby Van Horn or Vic Braden, some of these people that we talk about all the time, is they need to be studied. And I don't think they are. And with Craig Morris, I know he's been with the USTA quite some time, and he's had a few different positions. And yeah, so it's pretty bold of them to, just to say, well, we don't like what the USPTA and PTR have done. One thing I wanted to ask you about George Basho. I was fortunate enough to meet George Basho. Talk about a hard worker, and he, like yourself, was a school teacher. Um, he would go out with a cart of balls, but he'd go out with a cart of teaching aids. We could talk forever, but go ahead, finish up. I just wanted to make sure, because when people listen to our podcast and we say Craig Morris or Craig Tiley, they need a little background information that people bring up. And Matt Clore, we had him on a podcast recently. If someone just tosses some balls to his daughter, they'll know. Actually, one of the leaders with the USTA was asking about the GreatBase, and one of David's students, this was on the indoor courts, Ashton Kruger, and she, I don't know, David, she won the Orange Bowl twice, or she won the 18s, or now she's top 50 in the world, whatever. And Matt Clore told one of the leaders, the USTA had asked, and he's an employee. He said, "What about the GreatBase? Maybe we should have called it solid fundamentals, but who can argue with not having a GreatBase?" And anyway, so he just mentioned, he said, well, look at, because how the conversation started is he's really impressed at that time. Cammie Clore, 7 or 8 years old, and he was really impressed with how she was hitting the ball, even though it's being tossed to her underhand. And then Matt said, well, why don't you look down at Ashton Kruger? She's hitting the ball very much the same way. I see. That would be a good time for that line. Yeah, but do they see? But anyway, go ahead.
By the way, George Basho gave me my USPTA test, just so you know. Long freaking years ago.
So you and I have some things in common, and I was tested by George Basho as well.
He was probably the only tester.
Actually, we set records at Tyler Junior College. He was the leader, and we had the USTA. It was 15 or 16 testers. That was the largest number flew in to give the test. Where we're testing like 50 people at a time. But go ahead on USTA, PTR, and what's going on with what the USTA will do now.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what they end up really doing. And again, they got the money. They got all kinds of programs. I still believe that the amount of money to put in to make people better is not as much as they should be put in to get new people into the game, as far as who wants to teach, be a professional out of it. Because I believe that, as I said, the DPP, dazzling color personality, is what keeps people loving, having the fun, and the rest, yeah, you can teach them. Just take GreatBase courses and you can learn how to teach tennis. And so I don't know what that's going to happen. Our next real, since March 31st, we lose our accreditation for the PTR for the USTA. And I don't know what really is going to happen where, they were giving us some dollars. There's all kinds of things involved in that. They have not become real open of what they're really going to do, because I don't think they know totally what they're going to do. They brought in some very good people to develop some of their educational programs. I know most of them, and they're very good. They think the key is to make pros better. I think it's to make more pros. Of course, I want them as good as possible. Why wouldn't you? But we need more of them to teach more people, to get more people. Right now, 70% of the people start playing tennis in a public park. Okay? Of the 70% that start playing tennis, 99% of them quit within a year. Every year. Why? Because they're not in the program. I know, Steve, you went through TNT with us in Midtown, and, we get so many people in TNT, but they stay in the game. Whether they join the clubs or do a tennis, at least 50% stay to play tennis someplace, and not 1 or 2%. Because a person in a park, 2 brand new beginners take 2 Walmart rackets and a can of, or probably a bag of 3 balls, because they may not even pressurize what they buy, and they go out there and they try to have fun. There's no way they have fun. Doesn't happen. You can't There's no rallies. They don't know how to do anything. So therefore, the tremendous amount of turnover in the people that start playing. Right now, we don't have a problem getting the people, 2+ million people, start the game every year, brand new. They just don't play. So we got to go in the public parks. We got to go to the places where they're learning to play. If they come to a club, that's great, but not most people don't come to a club to play. They go to a program. They go to a park down the street.
Doug, could you talk a little more about TNT? I mean, that was so successful. Tennis in no time, you and Alan Schwartz. You do it, like say, month of May when the indoor season was over, the outdoor season, sell membership, but the social aspects and how you had people hook up for pizza afterwards, or they were given practice partners and ball machine times, and then how the pros had the energy for it. Could you just say a few more things about TNT?
TNT was created in the original indoor tennis world in the 70s. Tennis was an indoor sport in the winter and an outdoor sport in the summer. Before you had indoor clubs, it was just an outdoor sport. So when we built the first indoor courts, people said, we want to play in the winter, we don't want to play in the summer. Inside, we'll play outside. Makes sense. And basically, a lot of tennis clubs went dark in the summertime. By dark means the only time they played in there was when they couldn't play outside because it was raining or something. So tournaments were outside. When it rained, you brought them inside. So it was we called it the dark period. So we said, this isn't going to work. We need revenue year round. So what we decided to do is that we have to develop our own tennis players that don't know that rule of thumb that you play tennis in the summertime outside. So we started what was called TNT, Tennis in No Time. And over 50 years of doing it, it's been revamped, but it's been successful that Midtown Chicago with 900 people in the spring of every year taking TNT. And we did from social get-togethers. We created what we want them to do. We wanted them to come twice a week. We wanted them to be in a group lesson. We wanted excitement. We wanted success. We wanted to be able to play as soon as possible. We had parties. We created a member. You were a member for that 3 or 4 weeks of the club, and you could use the club. So we set up ball machine alleys that you could practice on, all types of things. And we'd get 50% of the people would continue in the summer in lessons, and 25% of the people would join the club. If you do that for 50 years, we have, a lot of your members came from TNT. And we had free indoor court time in the summertime. And we had all kinds of programming in the summertime. They loved their pros and their programming, so they played year-round indoors. That was our goal. That's why it was invented, and that's what we did. Right now, pickleball is having the same problem, by the way. I think pickleball indoor clubs is just for the wintertime. Sounds like tennis in 1970. And it's a sort of a blind leading the blind in pickleball right now, because they know how no one's there long enough to know if it's going to make it. You're starting to see some cracks, and brand new clubs have just closed in the country that was open in less than 2 years, but they can't make it. That's what happened in tennis too. So going back to Tennis in No Time, it was our beginner program. I had one club called JTCC in College Park, Maryland, Junior Tennis Champion Center. We do 1,200 people a year in our Learn Tennis Now program. 1,200 new players every year.
Wow.
And that's what tennis needs. How many people are doing massive beginner programs today? You'd be hard pressed to find many clubs outside of things that I have contact with that are doing massive beginner programs. By the way, 8 to 10 on a court is just fine.
Well, I do think that many times a pro is really only touching maybe 20 people per week. And, look what's happened to high school tennis. I heard you mentioned it briefly where years ago it was perhaps 80% play and 20% program. You're an adjunct professor at the University of Florida. When I started at Tyler Junior College, 80% of the faculty were they had the benefits. They were full-time. by the time I left after 10 years, it was 20% were full time, and the other 80% were adjunct. Now the youth versus veteran matches have gone away. Kids aren't calling up Mr. Cash and say, "Hey, would you play tennis with me one day this month?" And so yeah, I think the idea of teaching more people at one time and having the skill set to do that, and that's where we're coming back to. People should know the Welby Van Horn balance system, and they should know progressions of Dennis Van Meer. Jim Lair said this on this podcast, is that people just needed to see, if you didn't see Dennis work in person, he came to Tyler Junior College every year, and those are the things we have to go back. Dave has this theme. It's a great where I asked him on a podcast, what does tennis need to get better, and he said the theme Back to the Future. So much of the energy that went like in TNT. That was just a phenomenal program. Dave, let's ask Doug a few more questions and we'll let him take a nap.
I thought this was the 4-hour marathon tonight. We're only halfway through.
He sounds like he hasn't faded a bit. So we're
No, I could listen to Doug all night. No, one comment on something you said. I've always said I think some of the best club pros, anyways, they'd be great bartenders. They just, they could handle anything at happy hour, and the guys that have come through our doors here. I think of Tim Adams, that guy who Steve knows, and he just lit up every court he went by, and his legend, even though he's retired now, will always live on here. And I think that we do have to attract a lot of new, vibrant people into the sport to teach it, and the numbers will, if we build that, they will come. And I hope that the next generation are eager to get into the business. But Doug, my life is consumed with kids here at the club. It is there's been a major trend, in my opinion, that I've seen coming now for about 15 years, where people really the private lesson craze, where I've always felt that information, even if it's given to 100 people, it's a private lesson for everyone who takes it. And but we are definitely in a period in America, and I think it's just because of the influence pro tennis downward, with people having teams and this and that. What kind of trends do you see around the country in studying the clubs, the programs in regard to junior tennis, and do you think that it's some of these trends are healthy or unhealthy for the sport?
Well, there's all kinds of parts of it to junior trends. So, for instance, I'll make a statement again that I like to be a little controversial. Academies are good for students and for pros, but not for clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is they serve a purpose. They create players if they're done right, but the players they create want too much court time. They want to dominate courts.
Yeah.
So pros can make money teaching them and running them, but you want a junior program at a club, but you only want a junior program to go to some level, and then you can't become an academy. It's too hard. It's too hard to make money, because the average club member plays twice a week. When you start playing 7 times a week, you're a different kind of club.
Yeah.
And that's what the juniors, they want to play twice a day. And so clubs have trouble with academies. That's number one. Again, are there reasons to have academies in place? Absolutely. I studied Spanish teaching system for years. I was interested in it. And they had a great system that I liked a lot. And there was one pro for 3 courts. And he had 5 kids. And he had to have 3 courts next to each other. The court on the far left, 2 kids are drilling or practicing something. The kid in the middle is where the pro was, taking a private lesson. The pro knew what was going on in the both courts. On the other court, they were playing practice sets. So they got instruction, they got drilling and practice, and they got competitive play. And the last part of that is the real play. Okay? And I love that system. So for me to get 3 courts to 5 kids in the pro doesn't make it for 6 hours a day. Can't do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So that, voluntary started in the academy world, and I studied that pretty well, as I said earlier. And some of my students taught those academies with him. Some went there, and then the Bradenton and places, the Colony and stuff like that. So junior tennis is, I'm starting to get into my philosophies on this. This will be sort of fun. Number one is I don't believe people should come once a week to learn how to play tennis. I don't think you can. Once a week for an hour, you're never going to play tennis very well. I believe in practice and play. Every sport in the world has practice and play, whether it's baseball, soccer, lacrosse, I don't care what it is. You practice and you play. You may not play very well. Even your first year soccer teams that just chase the ball around, have no idea what they're doing, they practice something they play. So I'm a practice and play guy. That we have to have play involved so they're playing the game. No kid go home and say, I can't wait to practice. They're going to say, I can't wait to play the game. I want to go play. They don't say practice. I don't believe we should call lessons. It should be called practice. A lesson sounds like school to me. If you come to a clinic, it sounds like you're going to the hospital. I don't like any of those words. You want to practice and you want to play. The word play is you're going to play to your ability, whatever that is, and you make the game at that level for those kids. It's going to be different when you're first year red ball than when you're 18-year-old yellow ball. It's obviously going to be, but it's still practice and play. So I've become a big practice. I think everybody should come twice a week. If a parent comes to me and says, well, I want my kid to learn to play tennis, I'm never going to say he can do that playing once a week for an hour. It takes hundreds, 10,000 hours to learn how to play the game. That's a lot of 1 hour. Can't be done. So what I do with a new tennis, with a new student, I get their goals and I design a program for them. And I become their coach. And in that program, they must sort of do what the academy did for the Spain, is you must have instruction, you must practice, you must drill, you must practice play, and then you got to really play in some kind of event. It counts. How much, and part of that instruction can be private lessons and group lessons. How much you get of all that stuff depends what your goals are. You want to play high school tennis? You want to play college tennis? You want to pro? You want to be number one in the world? Or do I want to see if I like the game? You're going to get a lot of that. So what program do you have for all those scenarios? And what I care the least about is you want one in the world, because you're probably not going to get that. So the junior program in my world is I want you there twice a week. I want you to be wearing a colored shirt of the ball you're in. And so when you graduate, you get an orange shirt or a green shirt or whatever the hell you're going to. It becomes your uniform, because what happens when the kids go to practice for soccer? They wear their uniform. Kids love uniform. After every practice, what do the kids do? They have cookies and treats. Well, why don't we have cookies and treats after every practice? Do the kids like that? They might want to come to practice more. Like they learned that after you play tennis, you socialize with your friends.
No, that's great. That's great.
I go on and on with the things I'm stealing from every sport in the world. What works for other sports? Why do they do what they do? Why are they so big? what causes what to happen. And in tennis, what the hell are we doing? You come to a clinic, you don't learn much because you're only there once a week, and you go home. You don't get to know your kids. You don't have social. You don't have a drink with them afterwards. Who are we kidding? What are we doing?
Yeah.
How do people drop off?
No, that's fantastic, Doug. Let me tell a quick story and ask, and from that, ask a question. So I'm out at Indian Wells. I'm with Austin Krajicek, who I've known since he was 7 years old, and he's done okay. Kalamazoo champion, All-American many, many times, top 100 in the world, number one in doubles. And he's in the qualifying, so we're riding in the van. If you're in the main draw, you have your transportation is a little bit different. So these nice men are driving the vans, and I said, talk to him the same way I talked to him when I met him. I said, Krajicek, take those things off your ears. And we started just chatting up the people driving the vans. And I think with young people, we're missing out. Years ago, many times there'd be 3 generations in a room, and now kids disappear with their cell phone. And but if you could go back when you were 16 and could work legally, but what type of part-time jobs did you have growing up? Because I know tennis kids, I mean, they can't wash dishes. They don't know what a vacuum cleaner is. I don't want to pick on parents, but back when you and I were kids, Dave as well, young Ivan sitting at the table a little bit different, where when you turned 16 and you didn't have a part-time job, it wasn't cool. Even the wealthy kids were working part-time jobs. Could you just reflect back about your childhood? I know we're skipping back, but go ahead.
Every kid age 16 wants a car. At least we did. We had a lot of cars. My first car was a 1965 Corvair. Okay? Bought it from my next door neighbor for $900. So I had to figure out how to pay for it. And when you're involved in sports, as I was, it was hard to get a part-time job. So we did things like we mowed all the neighbors' lawn. I have no idea what we charged them for, but they obviously paid us something. So I had to make a schedule to have part-time work because there was no McDonald's. You got to remember, there's no fast food restaurant now going up.
Yeah.
So just think it's a different world today then. So you couldn't get a job almost anywhere. It didn't exist for 16-year-old kids back in this was better in the 60s. Early 60s. I was 16 when I was about 1963. So we did it by part-time and neighborhood stuff. I also worked a little for the Parks and Recreation. One of the things they did back then was every park in the city of Rochester had a hut. And in the summertime, you had counselors there that would play dodgeball and kickball and whatever, arts and crafts. So every day you went to the park with a group of kids from the neighborhood, and you were there all day doing whatever they wanted you to do. And I got one summer, I got a job as one of those counselors. The other summers, I actually worked at a Boy Scout camp in the Adirondack Mountains called Camp Massawepie. So those are my summer jobs. But, again, there was no fast food. You might have been able to work at restaurants. We never went to a restaurant that I recall as a kid. You just didn't do it. So it was a different world.
No, it's interesting. So then with tennis clubs, and I've had a chance to be in Europe many, many times, and a lot of the best players are from the countries that have the poorest economic structure. What can we do to change the youth of America where they have a better work ethic? And I don't think we just point fingers at parents. I mean, just as far as society, you just mentioned all these creative ideas. How could we be creative and have juniors work at tennis clubs and do things to learn a different set of skills?
Well, the one thing you do see is we have a big generation passed out, which is a good thing. So many of the kids who play tennis now is because their parents played. All my kids played tennis, okay? Different levels. And, in general, what your parents play, what they do, you do. It's sort of, I've got kids that played hockey because guess what? Dad played hockey. I didn't play hockey, so my kids played hockey. So that's the biggest generation. The whole people pass it down. If they love tennis, they pass it to their kids, and they make sure their kids are in lessons and stuff. We need more of people loving tennis and passing it to make sure all their kids play. The ideal member of a club is a 44, 45-year-old parent that both play tennis and they have 3 kids because all 3 kids are going to play tennis. You now have the best member that you can possibly have forever. And so one of the things we actually have done, some of that, is that we create generational memberships at places where the grandparents, your grown kids, and their kids are all part of one membership. Now, it's more expensive than an old membership, but it keeps the whole family together. They do things together at the club. That's a special thing. There aren't many 16-year-old kids that work at clubs anymore. There are a lot of rules and regulations that make it tough. I got into trouble once at a club in Chicago called Four Lakes. In Chicago, when this was back in the 80s, probably, kids could not work past 9 o'clock. If you were 16, you couldn't work past 9 o'clock or whatever the age was. And we had a guy who was coming in to close. He had a flat tire on the way to the club. He called the club. Can you stick around there until I get there? So he got there at 10. The kid had to work until 10 because he stuck around there. His dad was an unemployed lawyer. He sued the crap out of us because we made his son work past what the IRS said he can work. We lost $10,000 on that hour. So you got to make real sure you know the rules and regulations of what kids can do and what kids can't do in the work environment, because there are strict rules. So, but it's again, lifeguards. It should be easy to find lifeguards. It's hard now. That's a job. If you want to get it, you can find a job at every club in the country if they need lifeguards. Certainly in the tennis instruction, all your students understand the game so they can all help teach the other kids. And that's powerful. Teaching other kids from a kid is as powerful as it can be. And I know you like that.
You ask kids now, what's it mean to brown bag? So Austin Krychek, classy kid. Parents did a great job. So we were talking to these gentlemen driving the buses. It was just amazing, the stories we heard from these guys. So, yeah, I think that connection of wisdom. But yeah, that's interesting about all the policies, procedures, rules, and regulations. To be able to contribute to the club, and kids teaching kids, and so they learn a work ethic. And we always have the kids say the 2 pronouns, I, me, and say that's the tennis song where they're getting too much attention. Dave, go ahead. Ask Doug a question. What do you got?
Well, it was really in reference to I hate to even use the word academy. I mean, we've had a really harmonious relationship with the club. We've been very fortunate. In the early stages, it was a lot of tiptoeing around because it was a new concept here in Dallas. And but I just wanted to share that what we've been able to create is an environment that's kind of blended some of the things from yesteryear, where not less than 2-3 times a day, kids are filling in with, it might be a nationally ranked junior who's going in to fill in with the group of 3.5 ladies who the 4th didn't show up. Finding matches, as you know, for some of the 5-0 men. And so it's a really, really cool vibe. And that culture, I think that we're fortunate to have, going at this club. I think what we have to do is figure out how to, like you said, bring that type of attitude into the public part. We have to reach out. I don't know what exactly the words I'm looking for, Doug, but I feel like attracting people that care about the sport into the sport, to our profession. I know the USTA and USPTA, not long ago, PTR might have been involved in it as well. There was a big effort about people stay in Steve's position or your position or my position, trying to display work-life balance and things like that, and to show incoming pros that tennis is a very attractive lifestyle. In my opinion, though, anything worthwhile in life takes a lot of hard work. So what do you think ultimately we need to do to bring these pros in with the realities of most of the current situations they're walking into? I mean, because we can't lie to people coming in. It is a challenging entry, and but there is a great career path ahead of them. What three things would you tell people?
Well, first of all, we have to have a mindset change in the owners a little bit. So what some of the people today want, they want a guaranteed income. Okay. And most of us never had that. We had that, we ate what we killed. Okay. So how do we give them a guaranteed income of something? Number two, they want to know what the career path looks like. Okay? And the hard part at mom and pop clubs, not necessarily what invited, is the career path is a lot harder when you're at one club. Because unless the guy who's your boss goes away, that career path is going to end where you are. Or when you got a group of clubs like you guys do, like we did, you can go to different clubs, different cities, different towns, just like I did. Number three, the work-life balance. Right now, you've got a couple things that happen at most clubs. Number one is split shifts, morning, not much in the early afternoon, and then working afternoon, evening. People today don't realize as much that we have to work when people don't, because we're in the recreational industry. So you got to work Saturday and Sunday, or at least one of them, or something. I don't know how much Value does this, but at one time Mondays were a day off for all country clubs. Why was it Monday? Because they would play golf on Saturday and Sunday. It wasn't. So to have all your employees want Saturday and Sunday off in the golf business, that's very difficult, because that's the prime days to play, because they don't work. So we have all those things that work for and against it, and the definition of work. There's things going around like work week should be 32 weeks now. Well, I get it. It's 875. That concept's foreign to me. It might not be if I was 22. A 32-hour work week. That's pretty tough, and to make the same money or more. So, as an industry, we have to come to how's that going to work in the future. I don't think we pay enough pros enough. When you get a six-figure job first year out of college, you're going to teach tennis for $60,000, or that for $100,000, and get a 4-day work week. What kind of choice is that? You may think you love to teach tennis, but until you do it, you don't really know you love to teach tennis, and it's a career. No one goes into the tennis business to get rich in general. He's not going to get rich. If you say as a teaching pro, there's only so much money you can make because you only touch so much money. Nothing wrong with any of that. I've got a lot of great tennis pros that spent their whole life because they love to teach. And they have a great life. It's no different than teaching schools, in my opinion. You're never going to get rich teaching school. But it's what you love to do. There's lots of jobs. I've got kids, and my wife's an ER nurse, and she's never going to get rich doing that. She loves what she does. Some days it's a tough day because it is what it is, but they do it because they want to do it. Firefighters, the whole bit. Tennis is in that category, in my opinion. That doesn't mean you can't make a decent living at all those things. But it's not easy for the kids today. Here's what I think is also happening. If you go to college tennis today versus when I played it, if I played a foreign player in college, it was an oddity. Today, I'm sure somebody has the stats better than I do. 60%, 70% of my college tennis is foreign, some number. I don't know the number. Well, guess what? You name a pro that works for you that didn't play college tennis in the United States. There won't be too many. Our pipeline of pros are college tennis. And if college tennis goes foreign, sure, some of them want to stay here. But if it was 100% of U.S. players, they all want to stay here. Some can't stay here if they're foreign. The H-1 visas and stuff I'm involved with now, so far over my head because I got to find the pros. I believe that's the biggest problem with pros. All this came from play college tennis. There's very few, and there's some, of course, that didn't play college tennis, but not many. You have many on your staff that didn't play college tennis or are full-time pros?
No.
Wow, that's such a powerful point. I've never heard it put that way. Wow. Doug, tell us about your career with TCA, Chief Operating Officer, 30 plus years. When did you retire? Then tell us about Cash Flow Tennis.
Retired in 1990, 2005.
2005.
And I started in 1974. And actually, I retired from my job, and then I taught tennis for 3 or 4 years at the club. Just as I did a little part-time. Cash flow tennis was never an idea. I was going to teach tennis with one of my sons was teaching at Bannockburn Club in Chicago, one of our clubs. And so I was going to teach there with him. And so for 3 years, I just taught 20 hours a week and enjoyed it the whole bit. And then I got a phone call from an owner. I knew lots of owners in the country just because of my deals with Ursa and all that stuff over the years. Said, I'm buying a club with tennis. I've never done tennis. Can you help me? So I said, yeah, sure. Well, I now have 50 clients all over the country. And of people who want to have improvement in what they're doing and what their teams are doing. I do very little on-court stuff anymore, almost none. It's all hiring, firing, training, membership sales. It's all the other revenues of the club that I get involved with. So I'm helping clubs all over the country become better. I don't talk about it much. I don't advertise. I don't try to get clients. They find me mostly. Basically, there's a word out there. If your club needs some help, call me. So that's sort of what I do, and I like doing it. I have 2 rules. I have to like the people that I'm working with. Okay, and if I don't like them, I don't do it. Too old and don't need to work. But I don't need that stress. If you're not nice people, I'm not going to work with you. And there's some people I've turned down because of that. They get blown away a little bit when I tell you I don't like you.
Doug, could you back up and tell us the acronym IRSA?
International Health and Racket Sports Association, and it's now called the Health and Wellness Association. They just changed the name a couple of years ago. It started as the National Indoor Tennis Association in 1982. I think that's the date. I'm not 100% sure. And so, and Alan Schwartz and a group of that type of owner back then started it. So it's for club owners to meet once a year and talk about the industry and da-da-da-da-da. And so I was readily involved with that. It turned to be IRSA, and tennis got moved out of it. As long as there's no tennis in it anymore. Started as a tennis company, and tennis no longer exists. It's all fitness, basically. Huge, all over the world. They do a good job. So I started what's called the TOM Conference, Tennis Owners and Managers Conference. It ran for about 8 to 9 years. Hasn't run the last few years. I did that with the TIA, and the TIA sort of went out of business, Tennis Industry Association. And so that's sort of how I got to the University of Florida. And so the next set of courses that I'm working on is how to teach an owner to be an owner.
Oh,
There aren't many owners who know what they're doing, and they have no place to go.
Do you still run the program? You ran it through the professional tennis registry where you're training directors?
Yes, some. We did a lot. That turned into some of the director of racket sports in Florida. There's lots of parts of that because I originally did it with the PTR, and we'd have 50 owners come in for a weekend, and we talked about owner problems in the industry. Because that they never met, they didn't know each other. So I tried to put that kind of stuff together. I like that.
So if people want to contact you, they just go through Cashflow Tennis.
Yeah, they can find me that way. Just Google me. I'll find it.
I don't think you'd ever work with Anderson because I know you wouldn't like him. I'm just kidding.
No, Doug, I mean, it's been incredible hearing all your thoughts, boy. I literally took about 7 pages of notes. It's been a pleasure.
All right, so you're more than welcome. I enjoy doing this stuff. I do quite a bit of it.
One thing, Doug, Ivan takes notes, but let me talk to you a little bit about the tennis tech lab that we had, Tyler Junior College. We practiced 15 hours a week teaching tennis. And what we would do is we would have people that obviously you're close friends with, you've worked with over the years. So we'd have leaders from the industry come in, and then we would just practice. Like say if Dennis Vander would come in, we would just practice what he taught us, Jim Verdict, Jim Lair, and on and on. But that's what we need to do with this podcast. We haven't done it before, but we need to have a podcast on the podcast. But that was, I think, the strength of the tennis teachers we produced through that decade is okay. We've Vic Braden was here, and we have Vic Braden books and Vic Braden tapes, and now we're going to go out and practice that. Who does that? So I think that just because you play the game doesn't mean you can teach the game. Welby Van Horn arguably was the best player who became the best teacher. And I mean teacher. I mean somebody you could take a beginner and, so many years later they were, knocking on the door to win a national junior title or beyond. I think there's so much recruiting, now at I call it the third base coach, the merchant of flesh, the person who's out at the weekend tournaments handing out the business cards, they want to coach the kids who can already play. But I love so many things that you said, but the podcast on the podcast, just going out and being able to teach more people at one time, making tennis more affordable, more accessible. But no, thanks for this podcast, but then thanks for everything you do for tennis. But why don't you, Ivan, why don't you make a closing comment? But I think what we should do is just want to make a few closing comments, Ivan. But unless you want to do it, you want to go through the list? Just go rapid fire?
I mean, I'd probably set a record. I mean, I took so many notes. This is a real education. So I want to thank you, Doug, a lot. I can just go through some sporadically, not list all of them because there are quite a bit.
But we'll come back. We'll do a podcast on the podcast.
Of course, yes. Just a couple as I read through him here. The acronym that you had: fears, fun, education, exercise, relationships, and safe. If you don't enforce the rule, get rid of it. Biggest motivator in basketball is the bench. We tell juniors that all the time, how there's no bench in tennis, so they don't have consequences. I don't care about the things I did well. They don't make me better. That's not how I learn. Sometimes you have to make people coach you. Just skipping through, going to read a couple from each page of notes. I have, I think, 5 pages of notes. Compensation dictates behavior. You have your 4 rules. You have your law of agreement, your create standards, trust. Oh, that was 3, excuse me. You have so many things that you said that were very insightful that I never had thought about. For example, the not invented here principle. If you find something that that works well, just there's no shame in just doing the same thing. Um, the ethics check, is it legal? I found this quite funny. Is it legal? Is there a policy to follow? Okay with are you okay with it if it was on the front page of a newspaper? What would your mom say and what would your dad say? You have your 8 T's of success, and then what you need to manage people: responsibility, authority, and knowledge. Last page, a few things from this one. 10 or 12 year goals are too far out, because you can always say, oh, it's next year. And I like the stat that you gave that people should know 70% of the people start at a public park, and then I believe you said 99 stop after the first year, because they're not part of a program. And the last thing Steve said that I wrote down that is powerful is, just because you can play the game doesn't mean you can teach the game.
No, thanks, Ivan. I remember, Doug, you spent some time with Lenny Schloss, who over the years I've got to know, a great guy, and you just loved some of the things. You went to study what he was doing, and then you came back and shared it with everybody. I remember that. But I would say this is that the ethic checks, your parents did a great job. I love the fact that what would my mom say? What would my dad say? Go ahead, Dave. And I do think it's great to connect Doug and Dave. And I was just teasing. I know you love tennis, Doug. If you see what Anderson's doing out with his coach, his 25 coaches, they're probably up to close to 500 college players that they've developed over the years. But go ahead, Anderson. What do you make a closing comment, and then we'll sign off.
Well, I mean, it's been a great evening. I enjoy the podcast every time, and this has been a very special one, Doug, because of getting to hear you and your wisdom, and you can hear your passion about the industry as a whole, and very appreciated. We need more people like you, and we need more people like you speaking loudly on behalf of the sport, and I think that, to echo the words win-win, I think that's the most critical thing with everybody we brush shoulders with. And it's always good to hear it, always good reminder. And again, just thanks for a great night.
Yeah, for our listeners, before we came on the air, David is the new general manager. Is it what's the name, the gentleman's title? But he worked for Doug.
The National Director of Tennis.
National Director of Tennis. Yeah.
Of Racket Sports. National Director of Racket Sports, yeah.
Yeah, it's just so many examples of all the lives you've touched, Doug. But Doug, thank you.
You're more than welcome. So.
All right. We'll have to now let you know when we do the podcast on the podcast. All right, Doug. All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's fantastic.
Have a good night. See you later. Thank you.
Wow. Ivan, amazing. That was really, as Dave said, that was a really special podcast. But what history. I mean, just his ability to communicate. Pearls of wisdom, golden nuggets. Doug Cash. Thank you very much. We'll do that. I know Anderson would love to do that. Come back with a podcast, our podcast. Certainly with our nonprofit giving out free educational content, all the podcasts we have, what's it called? Show notes. But there's just so much. So he just shared so much wisdom, but it was very, very, very quick. So, this is something that, it was great. For example, so appreciative of Vic Braden, but you skim through a Braden book, or briefly watch a Braden tape. You got to take a deep dive, and but so much wisdom. Anyway, thank you. Good night. Another podcast in the books. More learning. It was great, Doug Cash.